So I went by myself to Jerusalem for Christmas 1999. And I traveled across the Sinai on my own. And I was indeed at the pyramids for Y2K 2000. And it was there that I met a British man who was also on his own studying Freemasonry and Freemasonry's symbolism and various ties to Egypt. And he said, "Oh, well, did you know that the only ever female Freemason was a woman named Elizabeth Aldworth?"
Hello and welcome to Holistic Circle podcast, Spiritual Conversation. My name is Philipp Kobald. We are reaching out to people who are passionate about spreading light, love, and joy. And happy to have here, and it's gonna go wrong, Kathleen Aldworth Foster. And
Aldworth
please help me.
Foster. Kathleen Aldworth Foster.
Wow, this was the hardest so far this year. So
Really?
bad. Well, let's introduce you properly. I'm really excited to have you here today. We've been emailing back and forth. I always look forward for a conversation, but this one is like a 3-in-1. It's like an extra looking forward because not only have you a mystic background, not only are we talking about secret societies, but also we're going to dive into history. So that's like a real 3-in-1. And I definitely very excited to have such a great package. And of course, you have a huge media experience, so you're a pro, which means I prepared myself a tea. I can lean back and I'm sure that you can just keep going. And my job is very easy today. So with all of this, dear viewers, we're going to dive into Masonic history. We're going to have a travel journey to Egypt and back. It's going to be a hell of a ride. So please stay with us. It's going to be goodies all over the place. And with this, maybe you can give us a little bit of an intro so people can orientate itself where we're going to go today. I can't hear you. You turned off your mic.
What the heck?
There you go. Never mind. It's a podcast.
See, some professional I am. I don't even know when that happened. So my name is Kathleen Aldworth Foster. I am a journalist turned publicist turned novelist, a TV news enthusiast. I spent my career working in television news, and I am the author of Donna Court, The Story of the Lady Freemason. If you'd like me to keep going, I can.
No. All right. I should ask at least 1 or 2 questions at the beginning just to pretend I'm doing my job, Otherwise I get fired just sitting here. You sent me an email before, and I thought, let's maybe start it there before we go to the book and all that interesting, crazy story you're going to share with us about the first female Freemason in the history. So it's going to be an interesting, juicy story, history, but also let's talk a little bit about the Freemasons. But you sent me an email just an hour ago that you want to address something. And you know what? You're not the first guest on my podcast who had these kind of experiences, who had these kind of things happening. And I always love to talk about that. And that's like the strange spiritual coincidences that happen to some people repeatedly over life, while other maybe not so much. So would you a little bit tell us about this story?
It's the synchronicities, right? It's the synchronicities that led me to the writing of this book. So coincidentally, it starts with the name you couldn't pronounce. It's Aldworth. So Aldworth is my great-grandmother's maiden name. Her name was Kathleen Aldworth Foster. I'm sorry, Kathleen Aldworth Shuck is my maiden name. And my parents were young. They were 23 when they had me. And my mother fell in love with my dad's grandmother, and her name was Kathleen. And she decided to name me Kathleen Aldworth. So I have this British surname as my middle name. And I've spent my whole life feeling a very strong connection to that name that I could never quite explain or even understand. And even today, I have a better grasp of it after what's happened in my life. But that's really the genesis of it is this Aldworth name. So when I was a little kid, I thought I'd love to just drop my last name and just go by Kathleen Aldworth. So years down the road, it's 1999, right? And those of us who are old enough to remember the turn of the millennium will remember that it was a really big deal, and it was also pretty scary at times. There were some conflicts going on in Israel, as there seemed to always be. And Y2K was coming up, and I got it in my head that I wanted to go to the pyramids at Giza for New Year's Eve itself, New Year's Eve 2000. So I asked everyone I knew who would like to come with me, and no one raised their hands. So I went by myself to Jerusalem for Christmas 1999, and I traveled across the Sinai on my own, and I was indeed at the pyramids for Y2K 2000. And it was there that I met a British man who was also on his own studying Freemasonry and Freemasonry's symbolism and various ties to Egypt. And he said, "Oh, well, did you know that the only ever female Freemason was a woman named Elizabeth Aldworth?" And I'd never heard of her. So it was the year 2000. It's not like I could just pick up a smartphone. I had a flip phone at the time. You can't just pick up your phone and Google people like you can today. So kind of kept this in my back pocket. And this man wrote me letters later, and he sent me the book, The Hierarchy, in the mail to New York. So he went home to England. I went home to New York, and he sent me The Hierarchy. And I don't know if you're familiar with this book, but it was my introduction, other than History Channel videos on Freemasonry behind the curtain. This was my first real introduction to the mysteries of Freemasonry that a non-Mason would get to see. So it's written by a man named Christopher Knight and Robert Lomas. And Christopher Knight has actually, I consider him a friend today. So this is how full circle things have come. So shortly after my trip to Egypt, I started my career. And I mean, the real crux of my career, that trip to the Middle East set the tone for on and off at least a decade of going back and forth to Iraq, Afghanistan, Israel, covering the wars after 9/11, covering the wars. So in 2006, I found myself back in Israel, where I was covering a conflict between Hezbollah guerrillas in Lebanon and the IDF in northern Israel. Spent about 3 weeks dodging Katyushas. And one day I told my bosses that I had to actually leave and go to Ireland on this pre-planned genealogy trip. For my grandmother had recently died and left us a little bit of money to go and see where her parents were from in Ireland. So I had one quiet day before leaving Israel, and I don't know why, but I Googled the Lady Freemason. I Googled Elizabeth Aldworth's name instead of the other family names that I was going to go see. And that's when I found out that she was from County Cork. When I arrived at Shannon Airport and met up with my dad, told my dad, "Hey, remember that Lady Freemason I told you about, the Aldworth, who I learned about at the pyramids? Well, it turns out she's from Ireland." And the man he had hired to drive a bus that was much too big for the streets of Ireland overheard us and said, "Yeah, not just that, but her house is still standing. Do you want to go?" What? So our whole extended family got in the big bus and drove to Donerail Court. So the name of my book is named directly after the house where Elizabeth Aldworth grew up. So it was there. The house was derelict. It was falling apart. It was behind a chain link fence. And it was there that the bus driver told me the legend of the Lady Freemason. And it goes like this. So the story is that 17-year-old Elizabeth, then St. Ledger, was a curious young girl, and she fell asleep in the library of the house, which is one of the front-facing rooms. And when she woke up, she heard voices in the room next door. And I love this. The story pulled a brick out of the wall. So there was a portion of the wall in between the library where she fell asleep and the lodge room. Today it would be called a temple, but on the floor plans of Donerail Court, this room is referred to as the lodge room, and lodges are what Freemasons call themselves and their groups that they have all over the world. This wall was under repair. Not sure. People aren't sure if it was a wall that they were putting up or a wall that they were putting down. I kind of believe it was a wall that they were putting up. It would make sense for secrecy and privacy purposes. But she was able to pull this brick out of the wall and peer through the hole and was able to see a portion of the ritual that was taking place in that room. And it was at that point that she realized that she had seen something she probably shouldn't have seen, and therefore tried to tiptoe out of the room. And there in the hallway, she encountered the Tyler. Now, if you're familiar at all with Freemasonry, you'll know that the Tyler is the person who's in charge of standing guard outside of the lodge room when ritual is underway. So in this case, the Tyler was the family butler, and he had to decide whether to let this young mistress go on her way back upstairs to her room in the middle of the night, or inform her father and her brothers, who were among the men in this room, that he had caught her spying, and he didn't know what she had seen. So he went with the latter, and he told on her. So now this is the story that we know. And if you go to Donerail Court, there's a sign in the town that tells this story and says that her father was actually ready to kill her. Her father and the other men were ready to kill her until one of the men stood up and said, "Wait, this is crazy. Let's put her through the paces and let's make her the first ever female Freemason." So that is why she went through at least a portion of the ritual that night to swear her to secrecy, to spare her life. This was in 1712, Ireland. So the story, the fact this happened at all is proof that Freemasonry was operating in individual homes during the pre-Grand Lodge era in Ireland. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, hearing this story made me wonder, what was so important? What did she see that a father would actually even consider for a moment killing his own child to protect? And the truth is, I really have no idea. I don't know what happened that night. And I'm not sure that anyone really knows what happened that night. Because the rituals, as Freemasons know today, didn't look like what they look like today. There may have only been 2 degrees at that time. She may have gone through those 2 degrees the same night. We just don't know. We don't know exactly who was there. I was able to find the names of certain people because they talked to their descendants about it, and there were newspaper clippings. And I really, after being there that first day, I just took a deep dive that lasted 15 years. And at one point, I came to the conclusion that I was never, as a journalist, I was never going to answer the questions that a journalist wants to answer in this story, but I still wanted to write it. So one of the things I really love is historical fiction. And
let me do my job.
you wanted me to just keep going.
No, I'd love to listen to you, but from time to time I have to annoy the audience with some question of mine. First, you said that the only ever female Freemason is because you mean that female Freemason are irregular Freemasons, and therefore
Correct.
she is the only ever real Freemason female.
Recognized.
It's a technicality for the people who are watching, and they're like, I heard that there are female Freemasons. Yes, absolutely there are. But they are considered irregular for 6 years. I don't know the precise number right now. But, and to your question, I think it's called Old English ritual that you are referring to. So now we have that all covered to a little bit for the people who are watching, who are like, so a little bit to give a context. But there are, of course, researchers who particularly research on post-Grand Lodge Freemasonry rituals and origins. And so you're more than welcome to find a lot of people who are trying to bring it back to its origin and all the way back to alchemy, all the way back to Asia, all the way back to all of this mystics and so on and so forth, if one really likes. But basically, it's a rabbit hole.
Right. You mean the old charges, the pre-grand line?
It's like with the Vicar. If you go to the, I don't know, Vicar is also I don't know if you're familiar. And even the first book that is like the founding of the Vicar, referring to the old masters. And you're like, wait a minute, these guys started it. How they're referring to the old masters? It doesn't make sense.
And then
but
there have been schisms after along the way.
Right, exactly.
But it's interesting that you bring this up, because I thought when I started this, and I thought that I was going to write 2 more books that would follow the course of the creation of the Grand Lodges onto the creation of the United States of America, which maybe I will still, but I am finding myself much more interested in what preceded this. What preceded
that is definitely the rabbit hole, because it gets more and more uncertain, more and more mystic. But they're actually interesting enough. I had a fantastic this podcast. Watch the podcast. I had some couple of great British historians who are not talking about Freemasons, but they're talking about the pre-area and how these kind of informations come over time. These are some serious academics, and we specifically talked about the mummies and the Egyptian mystics and so on and so forth. And it's very symbolic how these things transcend over time, gets rewritten over time, repackaged over time, like alchemy. Like we know that the 2nd degree in Freemasonry is based on alchemy. And of course, alchemy is a huge European spiritual tradition, who has a Gnostic tradition, which is kind of really interesting. Of course, now super important, because the last real Gnostics live in Iran, and they're definitely not feeling so well today. So this is the last Gnostic community that we have. And from there, there's a descendant of a Gnostic tradition, which then comes into it. So this is all, you could go forever and ever. You can go to the beginning of time, and these themes are being over and over repackaged. I'm, of course, that's what I love. That's what I do, going back in time and trying to find guests, desperate to. And I was trying to reach out just days before the madness happened to those Gnostics in Iraq, because I definitely would dying to have them on my podcast. Of course, all of this Zarathustra, all of it, that's my world, to understand how these things have come over time to us. But nevertheless, I think I'm speaking too long. It's your podcast, not mine.
I'm very interested in her family, the St. Ledger family, and trying to trace how far back they go, especially in the Knights Templar. I can see that I don't have proof of this, but I would imagine that they most likely date back to the Essenes. It would make perfect sense if they did. So that's where I'm at now. Every time I try to focus on making money and taking care of my kids in other ways, the Lady Freemason whispers over my shoulder, "Au contraire, mon frère, you don't forget about me." So I'm going back to Ireland in June, where it's going to be the 300th anniversary of Munster Freemasonry. So this is where more of these synchronicities came in. When I was deciding to write this book, which if you were to pick it up, you would tear through it. Some people tear through it in a couple of hours. Some people tear through it in a couple of days. And that was exactly my point. So talking about historical fiction, I love historical fiction. And I think that historical fiction plays a huge role. Any kind of fiction, really, especially what's going on right now with some movies that are about to come out. They help portray certain messages to the masses. And my book, I don't think it's the best book that's ever been written. I think it's what I was supposed to do. It's what she whispered in my ear, and I was the one who said, "Okay, yes, I will do your bidding. I will do what you want me to do. I will take your story and I will get it out there in the universe." So it's a historical fiction book that takes place over the course of about a month. And what I hoped for this book was that it would be sold in a gift shop at Donna Real Court, which is now open to the public and anyone can go. And it is one of the most popular tourist attractions in County Cork, Ireland. But instead, what's happened is people like you, the Lady Freemasons' ancestors all around the world, and Freemasons all around the world get wind of this story, and they want me to come, and they want me to tell them what I found out, what I was able to dig up, how I was able to separate fact from fiction. But the thing that I don't normally talk about is that a lot of what I wrote in the book, I thought I was making up. Things would come to me at 3:00 in the morning, and I would get up and I would write it down and I would incorporate it into the story, only later to find out that what I had written was true. And then people just keep appearing in my life. David Butler's a huge one. David Butler's the grand archivist and librarian for Munster Freemasonry. And the first time I reached out to him for help in researching her, it just so happened he was in New York at the Waldorf Astoria. So we were able to meet right away. And her family, when she got married, so the man who in real life saved her that night was a man named Richard Aldworth. So that's where my family name comes in. He saved her and they got married 5 months later. So he built a home with the same architect that happened to redo Donna Court.
Let me ask you, do you think they married as a safety mechanism, or you think it's a love story? Because I'm not the biggest expert, but there is a strong possibility that one of the elements was that he gave a guarantee for her in the fight for not killing her, and that they told her that maybe a condition is a marriage. Could be,
because what I found out that he said that night was, put her through the paces and I will be responsible for her for the rest of my life.
There you go.
And they lived together as husband and wife. Again, the only recognized husband and wife brothers in Freemasonry for 60 years. They died at age 80. She died 80 and he died a year later. And I love that. Well, I want to go back to a little bit about the house that he built her. So they lived in a home called Newmarket Court. And when I was in Ireland researching, I knocked on the door unannounced, only to find that they were working on an ancestry for the Aldworth family. And there were pedigrees all over the dining room tables there for me to peruse and see where I fit in. And what I found out was that, unfortunately, I didn't fit in directly in their branches of the family. I was a distant cousin. So that takes me back to the genesis of this story, which was this Aldworth name, right? When I was a kid, my great-grandmother told my mom that Anne Aldworth signed the Declaration of Independence. I'm from Philadelphia, and everyone from Philadelphia thinks that they have some kind of connection to the Declaration of Independence, and really very few of us do. And I tried to find out. I talked to my grandfather before he died, his brothers before they died, and no one knew what my great-grandmother was talking about. Then again, one night, 3 a.m., I'm woken up, and in my mind, I'm thinking she had to have known something. So now at this time, it's about 2012. I'm really in the thick of writing the book, the historical fiction novel I decided was the way to tell this story. And I finally put the right combination into the Googles, and out comes a pedigree from these very early Aldworth settlers in what was then Massachusetts, but is today Maine. And their descendant was a man named Elbridge Gerry. Elbridge Gerry was governor of Massachusetts. He was vice president under James Madison. He was a Freemason, and he was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. So my great-grandmother and her story, even though she didn't know who it was, never had a name to connect it, through my research into the Lady Freemason, I was able to solve a long-standing family mystery about Anne Aldworth, who signed the Declaration of Independence.
You don't know is, even if I'm a European, I have a big buck on the Declaration of Independence. And I read one or two books to that subject. So you got me there. Again, I'm a history buck anyway, but specifically the Declaration and everything around it is one of my very favorite things to read about.
Well, they are directly related. Elizabeth Aldworth by marriage is directly related to Elbridge Gerry. I pulled some documents, and there he is listed as Elbridge Gerry, the signer, and there she is listed as Elizabeth Aldworth,
But
the lady.
first, we have the historic element, right? The Freemasons are old organizations. We have a historic element and hard to understand. I always say with history, we must be so careful. We don't understand why someone would kill, which we would not do now. But society was different. It was much more rough, and things just were different. And it's hard from our perspective to judge backwards. We do not understand. So that's always for me important to tell people who getting in close to history that you cannot with your brain and you're having heating and water coming out of the faucet and so forth, understand the time where people, it's just impossible. I just wanted to bring this to the table. And also the Freemasons were a much different society. It was mainly illegal over Great Thames. They were under prosecution. A lot of things happened and, it was dangerous. So there was a huge need for secrecy because it pretty much was outrageous what they did, coming together as brothers, no social hierarchy. Again, something we don't understand how important. I mean, at that time in my country, there were rules which colors a peasant can wear, which colors a nobleman can wear, how many grams of gold a butcher's wife is allowed to wear on Sunday. And there was a police making sure that you don't have more gold on yourself than it was permitted for a butcher's wife. So we just don't understand the time and their rules.
Right. And if you look at the old charges and you look at some of the oaths that they had to take at this time, I wrote these into the book. Some of them were, if I were to speak any of the secrets I'm protecting, rip out my tongue or bury me up to my head at low tide so that the high tide rushes over me. There were specific means in which they could be tortured or killed if they were to spill the secrets of what they were protecting.
I would have to say here in defense that the Freemasons always use a drastic language, but that's more also allegoric to be understood. So just to put this in perspective, Freemasons in their texts are usually never literal. But let's move further. I just wanted to bring it to our times, just to get this little bit in perspective. I just think so much the Freemasons are under the same influence like society, like church, how powerful, important was the church, how secular we are. And just put in perspective why I think that the Freemasons from our time, they also love your story because it's so far away, and how lodges are organized today, how people go about it. Nobody's there killing anyone anymore. Nobody's ripping out anyone's tongue. So I think it's, as a Freemasons love to hear it because it's from their organization, but way back when. And it just sounds so aliens, I think, also to the Freemasons themselves. Do you also have that feeling when you go to the lodges?
I have the warmest feelings when I go to the lodges. I was just at one last weekend, and I have another one coming up. I feel right at home. Actually, let me give you a nice example. I always forget to bring my books with me, and there was a Freemason there with me last weekend, and he shoved into my hand a $20 bill and said, "Give me your book. Send me your book. There's a little extra in here to mail it." And when I opened it up later, there was his card with his address, and there was another card that said, a Freemason just helped you pay it forward. And that's the feeling that I get from the Freemasons. I went to Glastonbury, England over the summer on another research trip and came across a few people who had less than great things to say about Freemasons. And I'm not a Freemason. Let's make that clear. I'm not sure that we've made that clear in this conversation. But I see nothing but love and light and a desire to serve, which is, I think, something that everyone should be doing right now.
My podcast, I think everybody knows in a way, or very interested. Maybe big fan is the wrong word, but I'm clearly a deep studier of the Freemason cults. As much as one can be. But I do understand criticism. And for me, I always explain it because if you've been to God knows how many lodges now.
No, I don't know.
Roughly more than 10.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Right. And also, I think you've been not only to US lodges, I think you've been to lodges all over the place, right? Is it Australia or something?
I'm going to be speaking at a convention for an Australian research lodge that is via Zoom.
But
But also
basically,
Lebanon, been all over.
but generally, I come to understand that there are vastly different lodges out there, and some of them are very small and, very exclusive. They just don't reach out. They would not invite you. They're really very private. And other lodges are more scientific or orientated and more open and more communicative and more mixed into it. And there's a lot of criticism coming from, because this real world effect that worries people, right? Secrecy worries people. And so I understand the criticism, but whenever you actually meet open Masons that invite you and they want to connect, it's all warm and light. And I can 100% confirm this. So it's a big organization with a lot of history, with a lot of elements coming together. And I really understand, as a position of a Freemason, why you love that book, because simply, it's their history, but it's just a long time ago.
Right.
So tell us a little bit that synchronicity. Let's just tie this together for a second before we can a little bit move further and look at the book, so to say, how the story evolves. What is your explanation, those whispers? Is it something that is a karma, that is your individual? Because I have these people regularly on this podcast. They are literally can, get out of the car anywhere in the world and they meet a holy man. They get, that kind of a specific conversation. Is this your attitude, being open-minded? How to explain to yourself that these things happening to you? How do you put this in perspective?
I think that when a story wants to be told, I think that the story whispers to any number of people, and it just has to keep whispering to people until that right person comes along who's in the right time in their lives to do the work and get the story out into the universe. That's what I kept saying to my husband. And after so many years of those rabbit holes, they're deep and you can get sucked into them for years, as I did. But I kept coming back to this project. I kept coming back to this story. And I kept saying to my husband, I don't know why I'm doing this. I have a job. I kept saying, I just feel like I have to get this out into the universe. I have to get this out into the universe. And sure enough, once I did, it just opened up a whole new life for me. And this is now my path. I am supposed to be out there telling the Lady Freemason's story. And she...
Why?
Mm-hmm.
Why? Do you have a why inside of yourself?
I listened. I said yes. I said yes to the request. I don't know if it's an ancestral thing, because we do have the family connection. I have something similar happening to me right now. I just recently read about another heroic woman here in New Jersey, and she's been kind of haunting me lately. But for Elizabeth, she absolutely haunted me until I finished the book. And Richard did too. I felt like until I finished writing this book, I had these two people sitting over my head and just feeding me information, and I just got it out there. I know I sound crazy when I'm talking about this, but I think that even fully fictional, I think authors of fully fictional characters might describe a similar situation where their characters just become a part of them and force them to finally... Hemingway said, you never actually finish a book, you just abandon it. You have to come to a point where you say to yourself, I've done all that I can do. It's time. It's time to deliver it to the world. So I did it. I did what I was supposed to do, and I don't think I'm done. There's more.
So many fiction people have wrote stuff for really historically without having the knowledge, but so deeply submersed in the character that actually later historians found out that they maybe didn't get it on the point, but their imagination so much became hyper reality that actually it was real. So there is definitely a transition going on. And I think you made such a strong point in such a modest way. And it is very strong and needs to be repeated. There is a story that wants to be told, and it whispers to a lot of people, and one is the right time to hear it and pick it up. So that's something that I think we're losing faith, right? As modern people, these kind of mystics, we are just losing these mystics, and you're bringing them right in such a calm and peaceful way. What is your standing on what do you think, if I read this book or if women read this book, what do you think they should just learn about the information, or is there a deeper message, something they should take home with them? Like, is there a message inside?
I mean, I think that she was unusual for her time. She was strong. I think that she probably would have made an excellent journalist, someone who was kind of nosy. I had to give her a personality. And from everything that I've read about her, it was always more stodgy about her older life. Now, this was a story taking place when she was a 17-year-old girl, and only someone of a specific kind of constitution will fall asleep in a library, whether it be on purpose or not. I kind of think it was on purpose. I think she wanted to know what was going on behind closed doors once a month in her father's home. And she found out and probably got a little bit more than she bargained for. But let me back up to something you just said. You were talking about writers who've written something and not realized that they had hit on something that actually was true. And a good example that I have of that from this book is I wrote a whole storyline about her drunk older brother. I just wanted to kind of work in some stories I'd heard about poutine and the moonshine and how it was made and all these different things I'd learned. And then later I found out that he was such a drunk that his wife actually had their marriage annulled after only 1 month. And I didn't know any.
Quickly proved my point. Thank
Yeah.
you. Working a team here.
Yeah, I know. I thought when we were talking, I thought, did I already tell him that? I mean, that's just one of the things.
Did you give also people a little bit of, if you're interested in Freemasonry, except of the curiosity of the story, of the beautiful historical fiction, which is always worth reading? I love reading historical fiction. You know that. My Kindle is exploding with historical fiction. So there you go. But is there something to learn about the Freemasons itself, or
Yeah.
is to share something that people can a little bit understand about the rituals? Do you a little bit dive deeper because you researched your own, something you want to share?
Sure. I mean, this is a story of initiation and rebirth, right? Rebirth, reincarnation, that is the ultimate story of initiation. In her story, and in this particular story, I had to make a pretty difficult decision because I really didn't know what her ritual would have looked like at that time. The abbreviations are there to protect certain words, but overall, between the initiation and the rituals are out there. But the secret is the rituals, the steps, the words, they mean nothing. What matters is what happens to the initiate inside. And that, I think, is the most highly guarded secret. I mean, for me, I am not a Freemason, but since writing this book, I have joined the Knights Templar. I have been initiated, and the night of my initiation was extremely emotional for me because I felt like I was Elizabeth, Like, really, she wanted me to go through this. And I don't talk about it because I don't really quite know how to explain what it feels like and as to your soul.
That's why it should be silent, right? There's a reason why. There are some things that only can be made smaller by articulating it. There are some things, words just do them justice. That's why we have this phrase, right? Words can't do it justice. That's the reason why. And I'm with you 1,000% that there are some things that are just so personal and so emotional that just, words are not there for it. But I would almost like to stop you because I hope we will have a Knights Templar podcast on my list. So don't spill any beans here. But I think you understand her a lot better after your personal initiation.
Oh, I'm embarrassed to read my book. It's amazing how much I've learned since then. But it has served its purpose. What it captures, it was supposed to capture. I don't regret anything I've written. I'm glad that I I stopped at a certain point in my research. I felt, okay, this is as far as she would have gotten. So this is as far as I'm going to go. And then when I get onto the second degree, I'll start peeling away the onion to the second degree, and I'll go through this with her. I'm really happy with the journey and where it's taking me right now.
Absolute. And it was probably for anyone who's interested in Freemason or Freemasons itself, a wonderful book to read. We have a little bit time left, and so we can not talk about Templars because it is so
But
fascinating.
It's all connected.
It's horribly connected, especially when we know Irish and Scottish background, and we talked about it, how the Templars moved and so forth. So definitely it is a huge source of inspiration. It's basically no secret to anyone that there is a strong connection with it. But let me see. So you have the idea of looking the big thing that millions of books written, the influence of Freemasons and the founding fathers of the Enlightenment movement. I mean, there are books up and down the square. You said that you visited many temples. You said it was light, it was love. But where is your outside, basically, when we start a little bit talk around Freemason, how you see it, what is it for you, what does it make sense? I'm very much interested. What do you think what they're doing there? What is the purpose of Freemasonry? What's their job? What's their thing, so to say? What have you come? How far have you come with your analysis?
Well, I mean, like we said earlier, the lodges are also so different with different goals in mind. I am pleased to see that the majority of the Freemasons that I speak to today are interested in allowing women. They all know that allowing women is really the only way to secure the future of the organization. And I think I'm pleased to see that.
Do you really think so, that it makes sense to be like the intimacy of men only and intimacy of women only? You think that these kind of intimacy of initiation, things like that, in a mixed situation can work? We've come that far that we can let our guard down so much over sexes?
I see no problem with it right now in the Templars, and it's mixed.
I think your woman has a big role to play with that part of the ritual. You know that, right?
What do you mean?
Because to show that the male breast,
right,
that we don't, that they're not accidental women in coming into the lodge, that's so these things happen again.
Okay, it's kind of like the popes and a female pope, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Maybe because I had to write that into the book because I felt like it was something that needed to be addressed. But again, that's something that I didn't know about when I was writing it, and I found out later that that is one of the things that they point to the most as it, not so much improving, because I'm sorry, but lots of men could look like they have memories. That doesn't really prove much. But yes, I have high hopes that women will help continue this organization, and especially when you think about the devotion to the divine feminine, sure does make a lot of sense.
I'm, of course, very, open. I'm a spiritualist and so forth and so on, and I have no problems with sexes mixing and so forth. But the older I get, I also starting to appreciate that there is a pure male space in a certain way, and not because there's anything going on or not going on there, but just it sometimes one finds a certain security in that kind of environment, that the male thing can play out in a certain way. So I'm starting to ask myself, are we forcing something? What will winning? Is there ways to address it? So it's just becoming on my mind. I guess I'm getting older, right?
I understand a lot of people say that, but I find that mostly it's the older guys that say that they want to be out and doing something without their wives. I went to a full moon ritual last night. It was mixed women and men, and maybe it's just because I'm in my 50s now that I'm just not interested in and men and women. It's just all kind of become all the same to me now. It just doesn't affect anything I say or do or how I interact in a group of people who are all like-minded.
I guess the society is moving on and this will happen eventually. No way, because we just have progressed so far that most likely this is just the way it's going to go. But what do you see as a function? How would you define what the Freemasons are doing? What's their, how would you come? I've got my own opinions, but I'm very much interested because you also research them as much as I do, and even more, most probably. So what do you think what they're actually doing? What is the purpose for the individual? What you should expect? I mean, we know what they officially say, but what is your take?
Well, I'm not a Freemason.
That's why I'm asking you.
I really don't know. And I may only be around the ones who want me around. So I'm kind of biased in that way.
Because I think it's interesting. It's if we call it religion, yet no, they say it's a peculiar system of morality. They say something to make a good man better. They say a lot of things, but actually, did you ever study the system? Because I think what is, to me, if I would write a book, right, about that, I would be most fascinating about the technical system, how they teach people, how people learn within the temple, and the charts and all of the things and the tokens and all the stuff that they have developed. It's one of a kind with those visuals and those allegoric texts. It is basically one of the most fascinating education program that I know about, and also developed by one of the best minds of, I mean, Isaac Newton and so on, wrote some of these manuals. So these are like the top minds. That's why I wanted to see how your take is on that thing.
So if I were allowed to join a Masonic lodge, I would join a research lodge so that I was able to get into all of that. I think that a lot of people get into it and they don't know about it. They use it as a social club, they go through the rituals. They might not even understand what they're saying. Sometimes it's just a business connection. It depends. For me, I'm clearly going through as much as I can the deep initiation. One time I heard a Freemason refer to Freemasonry as the oldest self-help group in the world. But I think that is exactly what it can be if that's what you want it to be. I think if you want it to be research into ancient history, then that's what it can be for you. You decide.
And from this last couple of minutes, maybe we lost some of our audience, but I get so much more of the mystery of your book, so much more lovely to read. I'm getting more intrigued because the thing that we will never know is what makes it so juicy, that because we're always so used to, from the Hollywood movie, there's a kiss in the end and everything is there. And, we got the happy ending. And only if we watch the crazy French movies, there's no ending. We are leaving the cinema and throwing our popcorns, and we are, wild as crazy because we don't get we don't get the climax. It would never happen in a good old American movie. And the Freemasons, for us outsiders or people looking from the outside, we will never get the full answer. And this is what it just makes it so interesting to coming back. That's the rabbit hole, right?
My book is just a tiny little taste of one time in history and one experience as told by someone who is not a Freemason. So I did the best I could to tell the story and broaden it out. To me, I mean, to get this message across, you have to have a story that people are going to read. And so for me, it was a love story. It was a mystery. It was a thriller. It was the ultimate story right there and then. So we'll see. I've had a couple of interest from different TV producers and movie producers, and maybe it'll come out that way as well.
Well, Kathleen, thank you so much for this. It was a little bit unusual, but great episode, because for me, this is all a story about searching. It's all about being curious, having these spiritual questions, having these mystic questions, how we are scraping and scraping for bits of information, but it reveals a lot about ourselves, how we search, why we search, the way we come back. You talked about synchronicities, you talked about the coincidence, you talked about so many things. And this is exactly what it means to be spiritual, to search, to find the little nuggets, to meet the mystery man in Egypt, which most probably will be in some, will find him, and it will be another book.
The author of the the hierarchy suggested to me that maybe he was a time traveler and he was sent to give me a little nudge.
I love this because we are searchers. Yeah, you are a searcher, I'm a searcher, most of my audience. That's why they must probably listening to us, because we're trying to find these little nuggets. And if you've been long enough around, like I've been more than 30 years in spirituality, you know that these nuggets not necessarily mean anything, but that I keep searching for them. That means a lot. And with this, I'm so happy. And I hope I will see you again to talk about the Knights Templar. I love that. Thank you so much,
I'm
Kathleen.
grateful to the Lady Freemason for choosing me to tell her story.
Thank you.